Hello, and welcome to this edition of Digital Badge Academy's webcast. I'm Jim Daniels, your co host, here along with fellow co host David Leeser. And today, David, we're going to continue on with talking about the methodology that we have perfected relative to building out a digital badging program, right?
That's right. So we have a five-stage approach to this. We covered phase one, and now we're going to cover phase two. And phase two really is about building out the framework for your program and getting the buy-in for it. And so we're going to walk you through what that means and how to do it successfully.
This lays out at a high level the five primary steps that we have developed around digital badging program creation process. And so we're focused on number two today, which is the credential framework and buy-in process. It's really important to understand the different ways that digital credentials can be applied to your organization's business needs. It's looking at ways to build out a framework that is sustainable. And there's also a really important piece here about getting organizational buy-in.
Yeah, and I think that this is, again, this is one of those areas. This is the change management, the beginning of change management in your program, defining what the program is, getting people to buy it. But before you can even get people to buy it, you have to be able to tell a story. And this is what this is all about, is the storytelling part of it. And so what are the elements that you're going to need to be able to tell that story?
Yeah, exactly. So I think what would help is for us to just go a step deeper and actually look at offering strategy and what it means from the standpoint of objectives. And this is where it's going to get really interesting. And there's going to be some things that we talk about here that may not be obvious in terms of areas that you would want to focus on at this stage of building out a digital credentialing program.
Well, yeah. I mean, so, the idea here is that you're going to have to get in front of some key stakeholders. You're going to have to be able to convince them that this is what they want. Even if they've given you the directive to make this thing happen, you still need to continue to sell this program to people. And in order to do that, before you can even get in front of them, you have to do a little bit of legwork first.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes down to there's three kind of big objectives that we like to bring focus around. And the first one, and the more obvious one, is actually to start to hammer out that framework itself. And this is going to be where as we work with clients, we sit down and we like to start thinking about the kinds of credentials that should be offered within the organization. Pretty much everyone has an idea about that right from the outset. This process is to really start to dig in a little deeper and start to ask some hard questions and just look more objectively about what it is that we already know now what it is we want to achieve from the first phase of this process. Now we want to look at how that's going to apply in terms of what makes sense to actually offer in a way of different credential types. This is important this is an important part of the process where it's necessary to ensure that you're aligning to a set of standards. In some ways, that's even the very beginning part of the governance, the build out of a governance model, which comes a little bit later. So the seeds of that process really are being sown at this point. There's also, what specific achievements are going to be recognized. Are there going to be different levels of achievement that are being recognized within this program? And what does the earning criteria structure look like? Now, any individual credential would potentially have its own unique earning criteria. But if we come up one level from that, there's typically a set of guidelines, let's say, that you can put in place about what sort of earning criteria should be structured and part of any credential that's offered.
It's interesting because it seems like this is putting the cart before the horse in some ways. It seems like, we're in the strategy section and yet we're talking about some very tactical things. But the reality is that you need to build out this kind of vision, and it's good to put pen to paper and sketch it out. I know when we've developed badge programs, and one particular big one, that we had a lot of different ideas, and we were not ready to go in front of an executive team to be able to describe how we were going to approach this. Are we going to create like an airline model with gold, bronze and silver type levels? Are we going to align it to something that was already in the organization as far as skill levels? Are we going to try to align it to an industry standard?
Right.
And ultimately, we decided on the industry standard. We decided that, this thing, when you're developing a program here, you do want to be able to have a level of interoperability within your organization or other organizations. And you also want to be able to have some sort of equivalence. And so this is an important part of your design, is thinking of those things. So we went with like a KSAT model: knowledge, skills, abilities, and other factors. And by the way, that scales beautifully.
Oh, yeah, it works fantastically. And your point about it seems a little contradictory to be talking about this level of detail at a phase in the process where we're really trying to build out a strategy. The reality is, in order to achieve the kind of strategy or get a strategy in place that works for the organization, you have to kind of dive in and look at some of these things at a little bit more of a detailed level. I think that's what makes building out really high impact digital credentialing programs kind of tricky, is because there's some things that aren't necessarily natural or follow a traditional approach for how you would go off and build out some kind of a program, that's in support of whether it be learning and development or whatever it may be in service of. But it's important as part of the strategy development that we get in, particularly to these framework elements, because the two are intrinsically linked with one another.
It is really high level architecture. And when you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, if you're building a house, you'd better, first of all, know what piece of land you're going to build it on, and then what the architecture is going to look like, and how is it going to fit into the landscape. And we've seen some very large programs fail because they missed the mark on this. They've gone down a different model. There's one organization that decided, hey, they're going to go with an airline model with this bronze, silver, gold, platinum levels. And it didn't scale. It didn't work for
Right.
the organization. We tried to coach them out of it, but it was the way they went. But the bottom line is, like you said, Jim, this is the time to start to think about the high level architecture of the program before you get in front of the decision makers.
Exactly. So now if we think about, having worked through a lot of what we've just talked about, and we have some things in place that will really help facilitate efforts to get that buy-in within the organization. And I will say, getting buy-in within an organization is not as hard as it used to be. Back when you and I first got into the world of digital credentialing using badges, it was a very new thing, and it was foreign to a lot of people, and it was a threat to some people as well. Like those who ran certification programs thought badging was going to come in and kind of ruin that whole ecosystem, which obviously turned out to not be the case. But so it's a little easier today, but it's still very necessary to think about change management, because this will change the landscape in terms of how you go about uh, uh, building and nurturing a learning and development program, let's say, just using that as an example, and how that gets positioned in front of the target audience, what kind of narrative that you wrap around it. And then, of course, all of that, offering digital credentials, what is that going to bring back in terms of value to the business itself? And so all of that needs to be wrapped up and presented, to some really key stakeholders within the organization, as well as the organization on a more broad level, to help educate them on why it's important to have this program in place and how it's going to bring value and benefit to all the different stakeholders.
Yeah, and we created a full-blown guide on, how to get the buy-in for an innovation. But on a high level, there are several things that you need to do right at this stage. The first one is understand that your role is as a storyteller. That's where you're at this point. And when you're starting your initial stage of OCM, or organizational change management, it's storytelling. So if you are a storyteller, you have to know who the audience is and what they're listening for. You need to know if it's a sales organization, what are they interested in? Increasing their sales, reducing the time to, client purchase, buy. If it's customer support, how do we reduce the call center volumes, or how do we increase the satisfaction with NPS? Marketing, there's going to be another thing about how do we increase the social media presence of our organization. If it's a business partner relationship, well, we need to have more throughput through our business partners. So we need to build trust for our business partners. So you're going to have to create multiple messages for key stakeholders. It's not that hard to do, but you have to start to do a little early persona work here to say, here's who these key stakeholders are and what their message is. And then the second thing that's part of that is people buy based on emotion. They say they buy based on some sort of rational decision or some sort of data, but they always buy on emotion. People always buy on emotion. They want the rational side of it to justify their emotional response. So you have to do both. You have to show them what this is going to look like and how people are going to love this and how this is going to create this great, opportunity for them and for everybody else. And then you have to show them the rational side of it. This is the business sense side of it. This is how this is going to make business sense for you.
Perfectly stated. I mean, what you just said, if you can take that, if you take nothing else away from what we're covering today relative to change management, make sure you take that away. That's because what you just said is absolutely vital in order to get these kinds of programs off the ground, get them accepted, and build enthusiasm within the organization so that they can thrive and grow. Now, this next one, this third key objective, I'm sure to most people seems like an abrupt left turn from what we've just talked about. And in some respects it is, but there's a couple of really good reasons why we like to approach the topic of visual design taxonomy. And obviously in the world of badging, you have a badge emblem, and that gets created, and organizations want to have, a certain design language wrapped around that. And of course, if you have different achievement types, different levels that can be achieved, you have to factor all those kinds of things in. It can take quite a while to hammer out that visual design taxonomy for even a simple digital credentialing program. That's why we start looking at that part of the overall process earlier in this roadmap or in this journey, is because it just takes a while to work all the details out and get to a final design. We know from experience. And even when you get to a final design, there is always the possibility and probably a decent likelihood that somewhere in the future that design might have to be shifted a bit to accommodate some growth in the growth in the badging program. But there is another also really important reason for including it at this point in the process, and that ties back to the change management piece. What we've learned is and this is the case with most people. Most people tend to warm up to things when there's a visual element involved. When they can see things visually, what's this going to look like, ultimately when it hits the ground and it's in production. The sooner you can start to convey the idea of what this program looks like at a tangible level, what these digital credentials look like in the form of a badge, the better. That will help people really embrace and understand what it is that you're trying to achieve when you're going through this whole process of getting buy-in. So that's another reason why we like to introduce the visual design taxonomy. It's never expected at this stage in terms of buy-in that you're going to have a final design. It at best is probably a first draft. In some cases, it's just a hypothetical design, right? And the actual design work itself happens later, but it's just important to put something visual in front of the stakeholders at this stage to help facilitate that buy-in.
And I'll prove it to you what you just said, Jim. Anybody who's ever been to a trade show or a conference or an open general session at a big event will tell you that, if you're in the audience, you can listen only for about 5 minutes, maybe 15 minutes maximum, to some sort of presentation before you get to the demo. And I know when I was running conferences for IBM, we knew that we had to tell the leaders 5 minutes, 10 minutes before you start getting into the bells and whistles and showing it. Imagine if Steve Jobs got up there and talked about the iPhone for an hour without showing it to you.
Exactly.
He started showing it immediately because you need to have a visual to say, okay, let me make it real for you.
That's a great analogy and a great example. We all know that Apple, it's a very visual company. You know, when you look at their advertising, for instance, in most cases, there's little, in many cases, no words whatsoever, right? It's very visual kind of strategy. So it just underscores the importance for that. So, yeah, I mean, so in the end, when we look at this phase, you know, we're certainly following a systematic kind of approach to advancing the process forward. Some of these things may seem unnatural at this stage of the game, but believe me, you know, based on a lot of experience, lessons learned, and best practices that have been built over time, we know that this works. And it's super important to kind of introduce all these things and bring this focus at this part of the process in order to help, you know, create that clear vision and help propel the program forward, get the buy-in, and ultimately have a really strong framework in place that is sustainable.
And don't be discouraged if you have naysayers and you have people that are blockers. Bring them into the conversation. You want to hear from them. You want to keep those people close to you, and you want to make sure that they understand that you're taking notes and that you're capturing all of their thoughts and their ideas. Like Jim was saying, when we introduced badging, the certification team was not happy at all. In fact, they felt like this was going to be a massive threat to their organization. But we listened to them and we understood what their objections were. We ended up then saying, well, let's pilot. And we piloted in one group. It was a big group. Well, we found out that once we introduced digital badges to that group, their certification test rates went up. So then we had permission to go forward because they thought they were going to drop. And it turned out to be the exact opposite.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there you go. That's phase 2 of the model that we have developed. And the next webcast that we drop will be focused around phase 3. And of course, there's phase 4 and phase 5 that come after that. So, but that's it for now.
Thank you.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.